Welcome to my practical introduction to logic. This unit is about categorical logic. Let's start with a definition of categorical logic. It's a system of deduction based on relations between categories and the inferences that can be drawn from these relations. Now that may seem pretty opaque, but once we get a few definitions on the table, we'll be able to see the power of this logic and see its connection to the kind of reasoning that we do in ordinary life. So let's start with a few definitions. First, category. The term category refers to a set or a collection of items with specific traits. So here's an example: mammal. The category mammal includes in it all of those things that have the specific traits that make an animal a mammal as opposed to something else, right? We can talk about common objects in the same sort of way. For instance, table. Table is the category that includes all of the things that have the specific traits that make something a table. We often use the word term when we speak of categories. It's not quite the same meaning as term in the sense of a word, like a technical term, but we'll often say something like, what is the subject term of this categorical proposition? And that just refers to the category that's in the subject position. We'll get to that in the next tutorial. So the idea of a category is a collection of things that have certain traits that bind them all together or make them a uniform category. Now let's think about categorical proposition. A categorical proposition is an assertion of a specific relationship between two terms. So for instance, if I say the proposition, all cows are mammals, I am asserting a particular relationship between two terms, the term cow and the term mammal. So let's think about that relationship. The term cow includes all of the things that possess the traits or characteristics or whatever that make them cows, and the term mammal or category mammal is the set of all the mammals there are. So I'm asserting in this proposition a specific kind of relationship between the category cows and the category mammals. And intuitively, we could spell that out by saying that the proposition all cows are mammals means that if anything is in the cow category, then it automatically or necessarily has to be in the mammal category. So that's an intuitive way of spelling that out, but it gets the idea across that a categorical proposition is asserting this kind of relationship between two terms. By this kind of relationship, I don't mean this exact relationship. I mean the relationship between two terms. So consider this example. No cow is a reptile. Once again, we have two terms, cow and reptile. The proposition asserts a relationship between these two categories, but in this case, the relationship is different, even though it's a relationship between two categories. And we could spell that out intuitively by saying that if anything is in the cow category, then it cannot also be in the reptile category. Also, we want to talk about inference. The idea of inference here isn't special to categorical logic. It's basically the same notion across deductive systems, but essentially, inference is when an assertion is warranted by the truth of some other assertion. So let's take an example of this to kind of make this at least intuitively clear. If it is the case that no cow is a reptile, then I can assert, based on that premise, that no reptile is a cow. So think about this for a minute. If we know that no cow is a reptile, then what do we know? Well, we know that if anything is in the cow category, it cannot be in the reptile category. But if we know that, then we know that anything in the reptile category also cannot be in the cow category. So if we take the first claim, no cow is a reptile, is as a given, in other words, as a premise, then we can infer that no reptile is a cow as a consequence of that premise. What this really means is that if we take the initial claim as a given, then the second claim must be accepted on rational grounds. And on rational grounds means not merely subjectively. Well, what do I mean by not merely subjectively? Well, consider a situation where it's a workplace, I'm your boss, you're working for me, and I say this to you. If you don't agree with me, then I will dock your pay for this week. Now think about that. I'm providing you some motivation to accept a certain conclusion, which in this case is I just want you to agree with me, right? But I'm not giving you a reason based on the truth of an assertion like we find in if no cow is a reptile, then no reptile is a cow. I'm giving you a different kind of motivation, which is you don't want to have your pay docked, right? So that's not a motivation based on a rational basis. It's a motivation based on some interest that you have, or that I'm making a threat, or I'm manipulating you in some way. So what we're interested in logic is the former kind of inference, the real kind. That is, inferences that are based on the truth of the premises and the way in which the truth of the premise can warrant the truth of a conclusion. In categorical logic, there are two kinds of premises. There's, two kinds of inferences. There are immediate inferences, and these are inferences that we can draw directly, as it were, from the relation between two categories. We just looked at an example of that. If no cow is a reptile, then no reptile is a cow, is a case of an immediate inference, because we're able to draw the inference based on really nothing but the relationship between cows and reptiles. On the other hand, we also have mediated inferences, and these we call syllogisms. So a syllogism is an inference that results in a conclusion that is a categorical proposition. In other words, a relationship between two categories, but it turns out that that relationship is mediated by some term that stands in between and passes a relationship through. Aristotle's favorite example of a basic syllogism in, for instance, the prior analytics goes like this. All men are mortal. Socrates was a man. Therefore, Socrates was mortal. So think about it. The terms in the conclusion, that is, Socrates and being mortal, are related, but they're not related immediately because of anything. They're related through the term or the category being a man. So notice in the first premise, we're saying that being a man means that you belong in the mortal category. And in the second premise, we're saying that Socrates belongs in the being a man category. So in a sense, the category man, being a man, is doing some work mediating a relationship between the subject of this conclusion, Socrates, and the predicate of the conclusion, which is being mortal. Now, if some of this stuff is opaque, don't worry, because most of the rest of this discussion is going to cast some light on how these relations work, how inferences work, and we're going to even look more deeply at the relation and develop some tools and techniques that will enable us to investigate relations and inferences that are valid and sound. So stay tuned for the next tutorial.